And I know we still have some people filtering in, but we're going to go ahead and just jump right into this. So, first of all, thank you everybody for being here today. This is a lecture, Playing Without Pain. I'm here with Austin Pancner, bass trombonist and owner of The Functional Musician. We want to thank you for bearing with us on the Zoom situation. There were some unforeseen, unexpected circumstances that prevented this being presented in person, but huge thank you to the IDRS staff and volunteers for making this possible over Zoom. We're just so happy we could still be here with you today virtually and part of this conference, delivering this information that we're both really passionate about. So I'm Khara Wolf. I'm an oboist. I am an adjunct oboe professor at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, former digital marketing and communications coordinator for IDRS back in 2018. And I also am the owner of Websites by Khara, which is a website agency for musicians and small businesses. So I'm here today because I met Austin 2 years ago. And he helped me come back from what would have been a career ending injury. And I just really wanted to bring him here today to share some of these big foundational pieces and tools and hopefully be able to send you all home today with some stuff that will either help you maybe prevent an injury, help you recover from an injury, help your students possibly, or a colleague if you know someone that's struggling with some pain. So this is something that most musicians deal with at some point, whether it's just a fleeting thing or something more serious. And I think for us, especially those of us who've gone through injuries like Austin and I, helping musicians come back from that recovery process is just so critical. And even better if we can prevent it. So I met Austin in 2022, which was 2 years ago. And I just kind of want to give a little bit of a backstory before I hand things over to Austin. So I had fallen on the ice, January 2020, and funnily enough, it wasn't even a playing related injury that ultimately brought me to Austin. So I took a really bad fall. It affected my back and my spine. And I was 2 years into not being able to play at all. So it's every musician's worst nightmare, right? And so 2022 came around, had been 2 years into this injury cycle, had tried absolutely everything, which of course, anyone who's gone through any kind of pain, we're going to try anything we can. This is often our livelihood, it's our passion. Not playing is not an option, of course. And unfortunately, when it comes to injuries, when we're musicians, whether it's a playing related injury or even if it's not, I think what's most of our experiences, certainly was my experience, I think was with Austin as well, is that rest doesn't really do much. And I think that's maybe one of the most frustrating things. So I did Austin's recovery program in 2022. It was the one-on-one recovery program. It was a 3-month program. By the time I met him, I honestly didn't think I'd ever be able to play again. I mean, truthfully, that's where I was at. I thought it was over. I thought I was looking at possibly a lifetime of pain management. And I met Austin, did his program, and by the time we were done with the 3-month program, I was out of pain and the injury cycle had shifted. So there was a little bit more to it than just that. Of course, it took some time for things to fully heal, to get back into shape, playing and all that. But fast forward 2 years later, completely pain-free, playing completely without pain and normal. And even the best part is that I'm not at all worried about any kind of injury. So one other thing I want to mention about this program that I did with Austin and the foundational pieces that we want to share with you today is that I did have a playing related injury back in 2015. I had just started playing with the symphony here locally in Durango. I was teaching, had started my first year teaching at Fort Lewis, and a few months into that, started having some pain in my left wrist, tendonitis pain. I think that's a fairly common one. For most double reed players, I think it's more in the right wrist than the left, but for me, it was in the left. And I ignored it. I wasn't willing to turn down concerts. I wasn't willing to turn down teaching, just kind of kept going through. And which, of course, is what most of us do, because if you turn down a concert or an opportunity, it may not be there again. So by the end of that season, I was just under the impression at the end of the symphony season, I'll take a break. At the end of the school year, I'll take a break. It'll all be fine. And of course, sort of similar, I did some resting at that point, and it wasn't any better. So it actually took a whole year for that tendonitis pain to go away. And what's kind of crazy is at the end of that year, when I finally started slowly playing again, I always felt like I was like one bad day away from re-injuring, myself. And I think one of the tough pieces of these injury cycles, especially the ones that are playing related, is that you're even if it starts to feel better, it can kind of always come back, right? Or it can flare up. So what's wonderful about the program that I did with Austin and the foundational stuff, what we want to go through with you today is that not only did that program help with that back injury, which was quite severe, but now that I'm back to playing, not at all worried about re-injuring myself, just completely built that foundation back. So this is ultimately why Austin and I wanted to come present this today. And I think what's important to mention is that during this one-on-one recovery process, and this is just kind of crazy, it still blows my mind. The first 2.5 months of this 3-month program, I literally did not touch an instrument. And I don't know if that's um, common. Austin will have to speak to that. But we literally spent 2.5 months working on breathing, which is just crazy because you think as a woodwind player, oh, I know how to breathe. But no, not necessarily. We focused on breath, regulating the nervous system, and mobility exercises. Literally what we did for 2.5 months. And at the end, we did focus on instrument, making sure holding everything properly and all that. But that, crazily enough, is what turned everything around. Those foundational pieces were the magic missing piece that I didn't have. So a big part of what Austin's gonna talk about today, because I'm gonna hand it over to him. Austin's a wealth of knowledge, just unbelievable how much he knows, and a lot of what he's going to talk about today kind of goes back to those foundational pieces, which seem small but have a huge impact. So, a quick note, Austin, is there going to be a QR code in the bottom?
There is, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there's going to be a little QR code in the bottom of the screen on all the slides. So if any of you have to duck out or going to another event, um, it'll be there for the entire presentation, and then it'll be there again at the end with our websites. And we're going to do an email list. So if you scan the QR code or contact us after this, even just personally via email, whatever. We are recording this session today, so you'll get a copy of this if you want to send it to someone or watch it again later. And any other resources we reference, we'll email to you, and also just a way to get our email in case you have questions. So I think that's about it. I want to go ahead and turn over to Austin so we can use the majority of today to really hopefully send you all home with some tangible things you can kind of start focusing on, working on, and building that initial foundation for yourself. So good.
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Khara, for the wonderful introduction and collaborating with me. I do want to give a huge shout out to IDRS for allowing us to be flexible with the Zoom. Circumstances, life kind of throws you curveballs sometimes. So I'm really grateful that we were able to still make this happen and share this information. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. Boom. Okay, so before we begin, we are going to have a QR code at the bottom left hand of the screen, but I do want to let everybody know that the content in this presentation I've worked really hard on. Context is really important, and although we have our best intentions when other friends or colleagues or family members are going through pain or working through an injury, again, that context is really important. And I was having a conversation with someone the other day where they were trying to be open and vulnerable to their friends and trying to have a support structure, and their friends just kept suggesting things, like try Alexander technique, try yoga, try this, try that. And although those are well intentioned, again, that context is really important. And as you'll learn today, there are many different variables, many different factors that go into the complexity of what is a overuse injury or any type of injury that we as musicians may experience. And last thing, I am not a medical professional. So anything that I am sharing today is based on my research, based on my education, which I'll talk about a little bit, and also based on the years of working with different clientele and instruments and coming up with almost my own framework for this type of thing. I do want to spread this information, which is why we're recording it and why everybody who signs up for that email list will get a probably a YouTube link. We haven't really decided yet, but a public YouTube link where you can rewatch it. With that said, we may go through quite a bit of information today, and there may be times where you're like, what is he talking about? And I really tried to make sure that this was really simple to understand, but complex enough where we could start to make bigger connections to the bigger picture of injury prevention and recovery. So a couple of things that we're going to talk about, like Khara said, she tried a lot of different things, and I actually was injured myself, and I tried a whole bunch of different things, and the missing link was actually breathing. And I know it sounds a little bit weird, but breathing is related to tension. So with this presentation, I really want everybody to walk out of here understanding what tension is and how it's created in the body, as well as its relationship to the nervous system. And if we can understand those three things, we can have a pretty basic foundation on what exercises we can choose, why we might be feeling a certain way, why does my performance anxiety suddenly go from a 3 to a 10, and all of a sudden I can't really play as well as I can in the practice room or when I'm doing my mock runs or auditions. Likewise, I also want to talk a little bit about posture, a little bit about breathing, just so we're all on the same page, just because there's a lot of information, a lot of conflicting information, and definitions can be very personalized, and we all think of things in a different way. So that'll just help us get on the same page. So before we begin, I do see a couple of people in the audience that I know. So hello, if you're new and you don't know who I am, my name is Austin. I'm a doctoral candidate at Indiana University. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio with my wife and my mini golden doodle, Puccini. She is 1.5. Back in my master's degree, I went through some pretty crazy overuse injuries. I practiced way too much. I was very overambitious. I didn't listen to my body, and I ended up developing a lot of mental challenges, a lot of physical injuries, and I tried a whole bunch of different things. And at the end of about 3.5 years of these injuries, I was like, like I'm in the, beginning of my doctorate. I'm just gonna like find something else. So I wanted to just get out of the music school. I needed a fresh start. So I started accruing certifications, starting with personal training, and it eventually led me through a whole bunch of different certifications down the functional trainer rabbit hole, down the nutrition rabbit hole, and eventually led me to biomechanics with what I'm doing today in breathing. And honestly, I wasn't like trying to start the functional musician. I was just trying to get out of pain. I was trying to figure out my own missing link because things weren't working, and I kept, like Khara said, like falling back. I kept feeling like the injury was just right around the corner, and then next thing I know, a huge flare-up would come, and it'd be 3 or 4 weeks of struggle and frustration, and I didn't know why. And it got to the point where I actually I think I figured it out, and I've been injury free for over 4 years now. And then when COVID happened, I was training people in the gym, and other people at IU would come up to me and be like, hey, let's just go do a training session. And it was fun. It was a blast. And then, of course, when we all went online, I was like, okay, then let's see if we can make this work. Let's see if I can develop some sort of online program. And that's kind of how this came to be. And I'm really happy to share that, I absolutely love what I do, and it's amazing to work with all of these different instrumentalists and all of these different injuries and see how these little things can add up and compound over time and completely change someone's habits, someone's breathing patterns, someone's movement, and ultimately someone's tension and pain. And part of this is understanding why. Why are we experiencing something a certain way? Because if we have context of why, we can have context of our exercise selection or what habits we choose to do. Or maybe I just need to drink a little bit more water, eat a little bit more, and sleep more consistently over a period of time. Just a little bit about the functional musician. I'm not going to talk too much because I just kind of gave that intro, but it has been open since 2020. And the main mission is to help musicians overcome tension, pain, or injury so they can live their life, honestly. And with that comes performing at their highest personal level. I offer injury prevention resources. I have a one-on-one recovery program, and I regularly give workshops at schools, both online and in person, across the country. And I think it's worth noting that overuse injuries is an umbrella, and within that umbrella are hundreds of different types of very diagnostic injuries that you may experience. But ultimately, if you're experiencing some type of chronic tension, pain, or something that's preventing you from living the life you want or preventing you from performing at your level, that is something that I truly believe is in your control if you have the right tools. So, why talk about tension and breathing? It was pretty cool to hear Khara say, like, oh, I tried all these different things, and for the first couple of months, we just focused on breathing. And believe it or not, breathing is something that's scalable. If we can learn how to breathe efficiently for our body, if we know our limitations, then we have a whole, we have thousands of exercises we can choose based on how we are feeling. But from a biomechanical perspective or a bigger picture perspective, what I want to throw out there is our bodies are constantly adapting to our environment. Our bodies are made to survive. And that's really what it comes down to. And as we start to accumulate tension from maybe physical factors, or maybe we have a super performance, or I was feeling a little anxious heading into this presentation just because I don't know a lot of you. And this is, this is this can be nervous sometimes, and tension accumulates and our body adapts to that. And something that can happen is we can actually be put in a state where we are tense all the time. We'll talk a little bit about the nervous system as we continue on. But if we are stuck, let's say in a tense type of adaptive state, that tension is going to build. And how does our body manifest tension? With the muscle fascia and the muscles. And what's going to happen is we start becoming more restricted throughout our entire body. And one of the components of movement is breathing is a movement, and it's a full body movement. So if I'm getting constricted here, if I'm constricted in my neck, if I'm feeling neck tension, chances are I already have a great deal of tension somewhere in my upper body. And if we just think from a breathing perspective, and I want to take a nice breath, those muscles aren't necessarily going to relax if they're tense all the time. They're actually going to prevent us from taking advantage of our full breathing capacity. So let's talk a little bit about tension just so we're on the same page. Tension is something in the pedagogical world, at least in the brass world, it's something that isn't well defined, and it's something that's described as a big no-no. And it actually led me to pursue playing the trombone as tension-free as possible, without realizing we still need a little bit of tension, or else we just fall over, right? So I'd love to just kind of throw out there, muscle tension is characterized by continuous or heightened states of muscle contraction. And a muscle contraction would be like me squeezing my bicep. It would be me making an embouchure. It would be me, if I'm making reeds, it would be creating muscle tension and contractions from my elbow to my wrist. And what I want to throw out there is that we can consciously create tension. I'm lifting up this coffee cup, or we can unconsciously create tension. For example, you're probably not going to experience this in Arizona, but next time you're walking through the rain without an umbrella, just notice how your body physically, unconsciously responds to that rain. A lot of us, or you could watch someone else respond to that rain as well. You'll notice that they get really closed off, they'll get really compressed, and their shoulders will raise, almost like as a way to keep them warm or a way to protect themselves. If we're in an uncomfortable situation, a lot of us will unconsciously or consciously as well not necessarily participate in the conversation, or we'll just kind of step back to observe. Now, in music, when we're talking about overuse injuries as well, I want to throw out that or muscle tension is perfectly fine. It's natural. It's the unwanted muscle tension that we want to identify and remove. Because again, if we had no muscle tension, we would literally just fall over. Gravity is a force that's constantly pulling us down, and we're constantly moving within this universe, and we need some compression, or else we don't have any expansion that's going to occur. So this is a common question I get is like, well, what does muscle tension feel like, Austin? And honestly, like it's individual based on your genetics, based on your hydration, how much movement you've had, how much somatic awareness or body awareness you have, the environment, the temperature, the humidity. I mean, the list goes on, but we can still kind of put this under our umbrella. So any tightness or pulling is probably the most common of unwanted muscle tension. Achiness, dullness, general discomfort, soreness, tenderness, cramping or muscle spasms like a Charlie horse or a mini Charlie horse, or even if you're just kind of like sitting there, like if I've had too much coffee, like my right eye will just like twitch, or the area right above my left knee will just like kind of activate and kind of go like this unconsciously. That would be a muscle spasm as well. And then, of course, if we just kind of think about if we're activating all the time or we have unwanted muscle tension, again, some type of muscle contraction, over time, that is going to turn into or could turn into fatigue or chronic fatigue. We're just feeling fatigued just all the time. Whether, for read players, I'm thinking left forearm, right tricep, shoulders, maybe that right lat or left lat. So when we think about all the factors that play into effect of how muscle tension develops, again, the list is quite long. So I wanted to divide it into just 4 different factors that can be really easily understood. We have physical factors. We have the psychological factors, which could be internal stress, such as, oh, I really need to perform well in this recital. Like my life depends on it. I'm going to lose my scholarship if I don't. I have to do it then, or it's going to be, my degree is going to go 2 years longer, or I have to win this audition, or else like my family is going to starve. That is a lot of stress. That's a lot of psychological stress. And your body does manifest physical tension when we experience emotional distress. And both physical and psychological factors are both factors that go into environmental factors. If you're in an orchestra or you're in an academic institution teaching, or you're a student, maybe you have colleagues that aren't as supportive as you would like, or maybe you don't feel as supported as you would need to, or maybe you have a conductor that calls you out or says some inappropriate things or makes you a little bit uncomfortable in that situation. That is both a psychological factor that can turn into a physical factor. You throw in traveling for gigs, you throw in traveling for auditions, rehearsal time, driving time, the actual performance stress, that's a huge physical load as well. And then lastly, we have ergonomic or technique factors, and instrument technique does play a role. Ergonomics does play a role as well. And I would highly recommend, if you are experiencing any type of tension or discomfort and you haven't explored ergonomic options for your instrument, I know there are a lot of different options and financially it's not as accessible, but everybody at this conference has the opportunity to go hopefully try out all of these different ergonomic devices that may be at different venues or different stands. I'm not really sure. I'm a trombonist. I've never been to IDRS, IRDS. I'm so sorry. International Double. I always mix those up. International Double, IDRS. So go give those a try. But technique can be a factor. 100%. So let's just talk about the physical factors. That's what really this presentation is more about. And physical factors are something that we just go throughout the day and we can put load on our body. It could be me walking, 10,000 steps. It could be me exercising, or it could be a repetitive movement or any other physical activity. And what we want to think about is breathing and movement are one and the same. If I'm really tight in my upper body, am I going to be able to expand my rib cage to the ability that I want to? Probably not. And something that I do with my clients now is I assess, I do a lot of testing and retesting. So what that means is I can walk someone through an assessment. I can determine what restrictions are in their movement, and that gives me an idea how restricted their rib cage or their pelvis might be. For example, if I were to just kind of like stand here and reach my arm overhead and try to touch the opposite scapula, there are many people that cannot do that. If I'm stuck here, if I can't expand all the way back, I lack some posterior expansion in the back of my rib cage. For example, if I were going to go under into the left and try to touch my left scapula, and I can't do that, I would have some compression on the front of my chest wall. Again, when I'm talking about inhaling, I wouldn't be able to expand there as much as I want. And the crazy thing is, it took me so long to figure this out, is my ability to breathe was a direct correlation to how much performance anxiety I experience. I had debilitating performance anxiety to the point where I would lose feeling in my face. I really couldn't breathe. My body would lock up, and then, I'd go through a piece, and at the end of that piece, like, I would just be my embouchure would be so tired I couldn't produce a sound anymore, and my body would literally be shaking. It was pretty crazy. And as I started to work on breathing, open things up, and teach my nervous system how to down regulate, performance anxiety started to go away. And granted, I still get nervous. I still have those performances where I'm like, wow, that's a familiar feeling. But now I have a grounding technique that I can use in these high stress situations to allow me to perform closer to my level. Now, if we were to just think about what it's like to play our instrument, think about you're practicing over the last couple of months, or maybe you just got done teaching or an orchestra season or you're a student. Think about back to a crazy time, like during the most stressful time of the year, probably spring, probably April or May for a lot of us. Any one of these symptoms, or any one of these symptoms are a symptom of tension, unwanted tension, specifically that right or left shoulder raising while operating the instrument. Bassoonists, left shoulder, especially. Oboists, that pinky, that fancy pinky going out, that's an example of tension. If you feel tension in the bottom right portion of your wrist, or if you feel tension in your left pinky, again, unwanted tension. If you have any experience with expanding while you breathe, no expansion in the rib cage during inhalation. If it's all belly breath, also we're so compressed in our rib cage that we cannot expand there anymore because we're belly breathing. Now, that can be a technique you can teach and you can still get expansion there. So that's not necessarily a one-sided coin kind of situation, but something to consider. If you find yourself leaning to one side while you're performing or sitting, that's a sign of compensatory breathing. If you feel compressed, if you feel just like you're tight all the time, if you have higher forms of anxiety or just higher forms of anxiety on a daily basis, again, that's going to be unwanted muscle tension that is actually in your control. So let's go ahead and talk about going back to these factors. Now, these aren't a complete list of factors that result in unwanted muscle tension. There's also sleep quality, sleep quantity. Are you drinking enough water? Are you eating enough food? Are you moving your body regularly? Remember, the body always adapts. And most of us probably just got off a plane. We just got done traveling. Just check in with yourself right now. Like, how are things feeling at 9 a.m. in Arizona right now? Are you feeling a little tight? Are you feeling a little tense, a little tired, a little sore, maybe a little achy? These are all things we just kind of want to check in with ourselves and be able to like put words to, define. So I'm sure everybody probably realizes what these factors have in common. But if we were to just kind of look at these 4 factors outside the daily health and wellness habits and the theme of today, and what Khara and I were talking about, they all affect the nervous system. They all affect the breath. The breath affects the nervous system, and the nervous system affects our ability to move. It's all connected. So really quickly, what is the nervous system? I'm not going to go too deep into this because this isn't a science lesson, but I want to throw out that the nervous system controls everything you do. Controls how you breathe, controls your heartbeat, walking, thinking, feeling, and it's made up of your brain, your spinal cord, and all of the nerves that go from those areas. And it controls both your conscious and your unconscious actions and thoughts. And if we were to just kind of look at this nice little grid, we're really going to focus right here on the autonomic nervous system. This is a system within your body that allows you to do things that you need to do without thinking about it. It's your heartbeat. In some capacity, it's your breath. Maybe someone jumps out around the corner or throws some things at you and you like instantly catch it. Like that's a pretty autonomic response. And within the autonomic nervous system, we have 2 divisions that are deeply linked to our breathing. We have the parasympathetic division, which is your rest and recovery switch, and we have the sympathetic division, which is your fight or flight or your alert stage. When we think about the fight or flight, we think about performance anxiety, and likely so. But also, let's think about survival. If anyone's ever almost been in a car accident or someone's cut you off or you almost been hit by a car, you know that feeling of your heart instantly jumping up, adrenaline pumping through your body, maybe feeling a little shaky, maybe feeling a little muscle tension, and your breathing gets short and shallow. And on the other hand, the parasympathetic, the rest and recovery switch, if you've ever gotten a fantastic massage, if you've ever been on the beach and you're just chilling, hanging out in a hammock, or if you're just in your little paradise, in your zen, chances are you're probably super relaxed. Your blood is just flowing through your body. Your muscles are relaxed. Your breathing is full and expansive, and essentially you can fall asleep. And the crazy thing is, the body is so smart. As we go to the parasympathetic division and the sympathetic division, various structures engage and various structures shut off based on the survival needs. You have no reason to rest when survival is the primary goal. You have no reason to digest or reproduce when your primary goal is run away from that lion or jump out of the way of this car. Likewise, you don't need to tense your muscles when you're going to sleep. You don't need to focus and be alert when you're going to sleep. So these are two opposite ends of the spectrums that we should be able to switch pretty automatically without thinking about it. But also, we should be able to recognize if we go into a sympathetic state and we're highly alert. It's not necessarily a bad thing. But like I said earlier, we can get stuck in that sympathetic division, especially in the 21st century where we don't get a lot of movement. We have a lot of environmental stress. We have a lot of physical stress or lack of physical stress, as well as psychological stress. Last thing about the autonomic nervous system, in terms of fight or flight, I want to invite everybody to think of this as a gradient. Okay, so just because I experienced a high amount of performance anxiety when I was younger doesn't necessarily mean you will. Everybody experiences things differently, and both of these divisions are on a gradient, so to speak. So, biggest takeaway here about the nervous system, it impacts your breathing. If we're in a rest and recovery state, we're going to have a more expansive, slow, and relaxed breath. But if we're more sympathetic, we have more muscle tension throughout the body. We have to, from a survival perspective. And as a result, our breaths are going to be high, they're going to be shallow, and they're going to be fast. So if you're in a performance and you feel like you can't get enough air and you feel your muscle tensioning or bearing down, chances are you're experiencing some gradient, again, on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 10, of a fight or flight. So, going back to the bigger picture now, remember your body is always adapting to its environment, and your breath is a part of that. And I get this all the time, Austin, like my body knows how to breathe. Like, can't I just go to the instrument and not think about it? And I'm like, yes, I don't want you to think about your breathing when you're playing your instrument, but away from your instrument when we're doing breathing positional drills, it's super important. Because if we're constantly adapting to our environment and our environment is filled with stress, how do you think the quality of those breaths are going to be? The 20 to 25,000 breaths you take a day, it's going to have a huge impact on your overall quality of life. If we have short, shallow, sympathetic breaths and we're alert, over time, we're just going to be so tired. We're going to be chronically fatigued. Our level of anxiety is going to be higher. Our level of overwhelm, our level of stress, our fatigue levels, our sleep quality goes down. The list goes on. And as we'll learn here in a little bit, breathing is reflective of also how you stand, walk, run, and move. And if we can learn how to switch from that sympathetic state to that parasympathetic state, we now have a tool for decompressing, reducing tension, increasing movement or mobility, altering the state of the nervous system, and improving your ability to handle a high stress situation such as performance anxiety or a really, really, really stressful audition. So, what is the goal with breathing? I love this definition. I got this definition from Bill Hartman. He's a physical therapist in Indianapolis. And he describes it as expansion in all directions at the same time in the thorax and the abdomen, or the rib cage and the core. And if we were to all to just kind of put one hand on our belly and put one hand, let's say on the clavicle or your sternum, right on the top of your chest. So I'm not touching the neck, but I'm literally touching part of my rib cage here. And if I were to just take an, like just an easy breath through the nose and just exhale through the mouth, nothing really tense, I should feel both of these areas expand at the same time. If I put my hands on my side rib cage, if we all find our side rib cages and I inhale here, I should actually feel my side rib cage, my bucket handle ribs, whoosh, swing out and up. If I leave one hand on my side rib cage and one hand on my upper chest, I should also feel expansion happening there at the same time in all directions. And that's what we want to go for. And it's not something we want to force. It's something that we don't want to think about, but we can think about it and select exercises to help us access that. And whenever I start working with someone, one of the first things I do, Khara will confirm, as well as a couple people in the audience, I evaluate breathing. I want to see if you can expand in all directions at the same time in the thorax and the abdomen. And 9 times out of 10, people who are in chronic pain or chronic tension have some sort of tension in the rib cage, or they have no expansion at all in the rib cage. It's just all belly breath. And usually what's accompanied with that is neck pain, shoulder pain, upper back pain, or lower back pain. And the more we can work on that expansion and just letting go, the more those things improve. It's a pretty beautiful thing. So really quickly, just so we're all on the same page with breathing here, when we think about the breath, I want you, or the rib cage, let's go ahead and just look at the lungs on the right picture. Like, notice how big the lungs are. They're huge. In this little area right below the side rib cage where there is no lungs, that's where the diaphragm will go. But the big thing that I want you to take away here is look how your lungs actually expand above your clavicle. We actually have a first rib that has a little bit of lung tissue in there. And so when we breathe, if we're working with students or we're looking in front of a mirror with ourselves, remember that if we have an expansive breath that's happening in all time or in all directions at the same time in the thorax and the abdomen, we're going to have a little shoulder movement as well. Now, it's the difference between shrugging up, but there's also a difference between the scapula and the clavicle and everything rising as we inhale. So when we think about the diaphragm, it's actually quite fascinating. We actually have 2 parts of the diaphragm, and it's heavier on the right side. And we actually heavier as a species on the right side. If I were to cut everybody in half in this room and weight each side, your right side is going to be naturally heavier due to this right diaphragm, due to the liver, and how the internal organs rest inside. But your diaphragm is a really powerful organ that helps control inhalation and exhalation. And as we inhale, that diaphragm is going to contract, and we're going to have a pressure gradient change to allow us to fill up with air. But again, that diaphragm is descending. So when we think about descending with the diaphragm, it's actually going to push the guts a little bit lower. The guts are going to go forward a little bit. That's where that expansion comes from. But then we also have a diaphragm in the pelvis. And the pelvis starts to open up like a flower and allow the guts to descend. So we have this bellowing effect as we inhale. Our whole body is getting a little taller, getting a little longer. And as we exhale, everything compresses, the lungs get smaller, the abdomen gets smaller, and the pelvis starts to close, and all of the guts start to rise, and we get this nice bellowing compressive effect that allows us to exhale the air. And what I want you to think about here is that it's a full body movement. We have this full body movement, and to some degree too, as we inhale, because the pelvis is opening and closing, the scapula are opening and closing, we have a little bit of arm and leg extremity movement. Just a little bit. So it's quite fascinating how breathing is literally this full body movement that is expansive and is just like a firing bellow. I just love that analogy. So when we think about breathing, we want this full body effect. We want expansion in all directions at the same time in the rib cage and in the core. And we want to start thinking about this as a full body movement. Now, does that mean we need to go super, super expansive when we play the bassoon or oboe? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But what I want you to take away is, am I expanding on all directions at the same time? Because regardless of if we go to 90 or 100% capacity, we should still have these areas expanding, whether we take that full breath or whether we take a nice short breath, depending on what the phrase dictates or what we're playing or the style of the music. Now, the big takeaway is, sorry, I'm like all over the place here, but do we all have healthy breathing mechanics? Do we all expand in all directions at the same time? Just a show of hands, did anybody not expand in all directions at the same time? Yeah, I see a couple of hands for sure. And again, 21st century stress. The body's always adapting, and that's how we accumulate tension within the body. And what I want you to think about here is most of us are going to have some sort of layers of compensation, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to experience tension or pain. However, genetics, bone structure, height, rib cage style, whether you have a super wide rib cage that's short or a really long and tall rib cage, those are both going to behave differently and also influence how the body adapts. So when we think about posture, I want you to think about center of gravity. That's what this line is. It's your center of gravity. And center of gravity is going to be determined by your skeletal structure and how it's adapting to gravity. So in this instance, if we look at the feet, the knees, the hips, the lower rib cage, the shoulders, and the skull, we both have a center of gravity that's pretty even within the body, right? Great. That gives us the most amount of movement. That's going to give us the most amount of movement in the shoulders, in the hips, hip hinges, squats, all of the fun stuff, and it's going to give us more access to our breathing capacity. However, as we start to adapt to, again, the stress, we're going to adapt in essentially one or two directions. And this is going to be dependent on your ribcage style. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but essentially your body is going to predictably go down one of these different paths. And I want everybody to think of these two postures, anterior pelvic tilt and the sway back posture, again, as a gradient, just like the fight or flight. These are the most extreme representations, and everybody's going to fall within the line between these two postures. So when we think about a sway back posture, these are these really, again, narrow, tall basketball players, marathon runners, and then we have people who are more of an anterior pelvic tilt that are more like have a wider rib cage. We can think like NFL lineman or sumo wrestler, someone that's a little bit wider in structure based on their rib cage. But notice the center of gravity. What happened to it? Are we a little bit more backwards? Are we a little bit more forwards? We're a little bit more forwards. We have more body ahead of that line. And if you were just sitting in your chair and you were to just to lean forward, the more you lean forward, just kind of notice how your body responds. If you were to take a breath just sitting nice and comfortably, but the more you lean forward, if you lean forward and take a breath, it's going to feel a little bit different. And the body responds in all of those different areas, the feet, the knees, the hips, lower ribcage, shoulders, and the skull, to just help us support ourselves up against gravity. But the further forward we are against gravity, the less breathing capacity we can actually take advantage of, the less movement we have, the more unwanted tension we have, the higher levels of anxiety and muscle tension are going to be increased on a daily basis. And movement is going to be decreased as well. But again, not a problem for everybody, but it is something that naturally happens within our world. The other thing that can happen too, we can literally have a drop on the left side or the right side, again, depending on your compensation cycle. And if we just think about breathing capacity, again, being rotated and twisted, this is going to affect movement as a whole. This is going to affect how your rib cage expands. It's going to affect how your hips expand. It's going to affect how you walk. And a lot of people think that this is something that you're born with. And yes, I understand genetics do play a role. Bone structure plays a role. Bone density plays a role as well. But this is actually a compensatory cycle from your breathing, from the 20 to 25,000 breaths we take a day. So if we know what our compensation cycle is, guess what? We have tools we can use to reverse the cycle, become more aligned, and increase that ease within our breathing apparatus, which is pretty cool. Now, when we think about what we want to achieve, there's something called the stack, and it's the alignment of the lower rib cage and the pelvis. And the little green bloopies, that is the top one is your diaphragm within your rib cage, and the bottom one is your pelvic diaphragm. And when those two are aligned, that really allows us to expand a little bit more in all directions. If we were to just kind of do an experiment together, and I were to just kind of like sit comfortably, take a breath, take a couple of breaths. You can feel around for the expansion, and then just go ahead and be like, just kind of like compress and be like, yeah, I'm just kind of chilling here. I'm looking at my phone. Go ahead and take a breath. Just see how it feels. Take a couple of breaths, and then act like you're sitting up straight and you're just, you're extending, you're as straight as you can, and go ahead and take a breath as well. And then go back to that neutral posture and take a breath and see what it feels like. It's gonna feel different. And if you were to look in actually an inspirometer or measure the amount of air that you could actually take in, and this is shown in research studies, the breathing capacity changes. And you have a little bit more in this stack. And you also have a little bit more movement in this stack as well. If you go into the same positions, if I go completely extended and I try to raise my arm, I'm only going to be able to go so much. Same thing if I compress, I raise my arm, I can only go so much. My scapula no longer have movement to move on. And if we have more movement available, we have more breathing available. So if we were to compare it back to those postures, anterior pelvic tilt and that sway back posture, just notice the position of the diaphragms now. Notice the arrows. Notice how our center of gravity is a little bit more forward if I were to draw a line just straight down the middle. Beep. Again, not a problem for everybody, but it does have implications on our breathing. Okay, so now a lot of you might be thinking like, okay, like that's great, all and dandy, but like how do I know like if I have unwanted tension in my breathing? Well, if we were to think posturally, if you find yourself with most of the weight on your toes, or so the inner parts of your feet, or most of the weight on the outside of part of your feet as you walk, as you stand, or as you sit, that is a sign. If you find that you have a flared rib cage, meaning if you find your lower rib cage and we kind of go to the corners, if you notice your rib cage is constantly out all the time, or we're constantly in this extended position like this, like we're doing a row, or we're opening up our shirt like Superman, that is a sign of unwanted tension. If you're feeling starved for air, and this is a big one for oboe players in particular, I love you all, but you do not like to inhale all the way. And you also don't like to exhale all the way. And a lot of the oboe players that I've worked with in the past, I'll have them try to exhale all the way and they can't. Or I'll have them try to inhale all the way and they can't. And we'll talk about that strategy here towards the end of this call as we get into it. But we want to be able to have full excursion, or that full movement all the way to exhaling, all the way to completely empty, while also inhaling expansively. The other big ones, again, physical neck tension is huge, shoulder tension, lower back tension, knee pain, ankle pain. These are all just symptoms of the bigger picture of how your body moves, but also Valsalva problems or hesitation problems. A lot of people think that inhalation and exhalation is cyclical, and it is cyclical in a way, but there's also a pause up there. But if we start controlling it, we start developing those hesitation problems, and we start creating compression in the core to try to create a sound. And that is something that, again, is a pattern that can be really detrimental in the long run in terms of our performance health. Now, the physical signs, I already talked about this a little bit, but I think the biggest takeaway here is just general tension during breathing when you're playing your specific instrument. After a long session, a practice session or a performance, if you feel neck tension right away, if you feel pain in your neck or your shoulders, compensatory breathing. That means that's in your control to manage if you have the right tools there. The other thing too is any sensation or activation of muscle groups during exhalation other than the core. So if I inhale and I'm playing a long passage and I start feeling my back kick on, if I start feeling my lats or my neck kick on or my shoulders or my forearms kick on, my body is trying to help me find a way to compress to get the sound that I want to truly make that instrument resonate. Now, here's what Khara and I did not see coming after, our injury cycles. This is exactly what both of us have experienced. Increased amounts of resting tension to move and breathe. I woke up every day feeling like I aged 40 years. I had the most terrible posture. If you go back, my left shoulder is raised like this, my neck's over here, my hips are all contorted. I was also very stressed and anxious and also was going through depression at the time. We were both restricted and limited in movement. And overall, life was just kind of like not what it was meant to be. It was hard, it was challenging. And I knew there was something out there that would help. So let's go ahead and talk about this. We have about 10 minutes left. What I want to throw out there is that everybody's posture is different. And although we didn't talk about rib cage styles, all of these exercises are going to help you no matter what. So if you're new to this type of breathing, if you're feeling tense or in pain, or you don't feel good at the end of one of these conference days, or you have 30 minutes to go back to your dorm or hotel room and just kind of chillax, experiment with these. Set a timer for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, stand up, see how you feel. If you do these with the right intention, I promise you're going to feel so much better. It's amazing how little you need to do to feel that reduction in tension. I'll talk about these as we go along, but basically the first exercise, if you've ever done any Alexander technique, this should look familiar. This is essentially a constructive rest position, but this is called a hook lying position. Essentially what you do, you lay on your back, your feet are flat on the floor, and you put your hands on the thorax and the rib cage, and you're literally just bringing awareness to your breath. Are you expanding in all directions at the same time? At the same time is key. And if you notice that there's a disconnect, or if you notice you're only breathing in the belly or only in the chest, you can just bring a little bit more awareness and focus on expanding the areas that aren't. And the cool thing about this exercise, if you have lower back pain, middle back pain, upper back pain, or neck pain, think about what gravity is doing in this position. It's pulling everything down. We're organisms that are a great percentage of water. We have a lot of organs and internal things going on, and gravity pulls that down. So really, in a sense, this expands the lower back, the middle back, the upper back, and the neck all in one time. And if you wanted to put like your feet on a chair, like in a 90-90 position, or up against a wall, that will also help give a little bit more expansion in the lower back if you're experiencing tension down there. The next one, this is my personal favorite that I would recommend anybody do after travel. One of the areas that become compressed after prolonged periods of stress is the front of the rib cage and the back of the rib cage. If my hand is a rib cage here and I'm laying on my side, so this is the front, this is the back. Again, the organs are coming down. It starts to expand down here. So we get a little expansion in the front and we get a little expansion in the back. And essentially what you want to do is just get in a side lying position. Your knees are comfortable, 45 degrees maybe, all the way up to 90. But the most important thing with any of these exercises is you start them as relaxed as possible. If you already notice tension creeping in that beginning of the exercise, again, breathing is a pattern. So if we sit there in our tension, we're not really going to be doing much in this particular circumstance. We're just going to be patterning habitual lines of tension in our breathing. So we really want to make sure that we're relaxed as possible. And that's why you'll see in these pictures, someone has they have props underneath their head to support their head. They have a prop underneath their side rib cage to help get a little expansion there. And that can feel really good. And then the cool thing about this too, if you have one side that's a lot tighter than the other, we can have a little bit of a bigger prop here. And instead of being stacked, we can imagine one side being closed and one side being open. So I'm like at a side bend in this exercise. Okay, so now we have prone breathing. This is where we're just lying literally on the floor. And if we were to think about expansion in terms of gravity, what areas would we be expanding? The back, the sides, or the front? We'd be expanding mostly the front. Again, gravity pulling down. And when we breathe, we do fill from the bottom up. So if you do have chest tightness, if you have a hard time expanding the front of the chest, or if you feel your six pack just engage all the time when you're breathing, that actually shouldn't be the case. And this can be a great exercise you can go to reduce that muscle tension and muscle tone. And this exercise honestly just feels really good. We're just kind of hanging out. The above exercise called crime scene pose, hilarious. And then we have just like a prone on elbows. You're supporting yourself with your head. If you wanted to, look to the right. If you wanted to look to the left as you do this, we would be expanding a little bit more on the side that we're looking towards. Okay, and then last we have quadruped breathing, and quadruped just literally means being on all fours. We have two different examples here. We have the classic cat-cow position, right? We can do this on our hands or we can do this on our elbows. And when we breathe again, using gravity as, one of our primary constraints, we're going to expand a lot of that front side of the body. However, in the left picture, we're in a little bit of a different position. We're actually, I don't know if you can see the difference, but there is a huge rounding throughout the entire back in the left picture versus the right. We're also compressing the front. So if we compress the front and we try to inhale into that compression, air is going to follow the path of least resistance. So where's it going to go? It's going to bounce off that compression and we're going to be able to expand posteriorly in that back. So again, this is a great exercise, lower back tension, upper back tension, neck tension specifically. And this allows you to expand that whole entire arc. And this is also a great assessment too. If you take a picture of yourself and you do this exercise, we should see like a nice, beautiful curvature of the lower middle upper back and the cervical spine. Nice curvature. And if you have tension, let's say in your lower back, you'll actually see something called a tenting, where that beautiful curvature goes more straight. Okay, so
I'm sorry, but I think this is when our lecture has to be over.
Okay, for sure.
The room is going to be used for something else right now. Thank you.
Of course, just 10 seconds. Follow the QR code if you enjoyed this lecture, and you'll get all the exercises we just talked about as well as a recording. Thank you everybody for coming and hope you enjoy the rest of your festival.
Thank you.